Hello, hello. Welcome to English Extras. My name is Jean. If you're here, it's because you don't want to sound like a textbook. You're in the right place. This podcast is to help intermediate and advanced learners find alternatives to textbook English so you can express yourself authentically. Before we begin, if you want the transcript for this episode, you can follow the link in the description. Reading and listening at the same time is a great way to improve your English. And I also include definitions of words and phrases I use in the episode, as well as example sentences at the end of each transcript. Ready? Let's begin. Forget vocabulary, forget pronunciation, forget grammar, forget conjugations, declensions, cases, gender. From my perspective as both a language teacher and a language student, learning numbers is one of the hardest parts of learning another language. In this episode, I'm going to attempt to clarify some of the ways we talk about numbers in English. As always, I will try to share with you things that you probably won't ever learn about in a textbook. And I'm also going to share some common mistakes I hear as a teacher. First, I want to talk about something that is not a mistake, but it is a less common way to say something. That is how native speakers will say numbers when they are in the thousands. Here's what I hear my students say: 2,500. 2500, 2,500. This is not wrong. However, it is the longest way to say it. And remember, native speakers are lazy. If there is a shorter way to say something, we will use it. So let's take the number 2,500. The way I would say this number, the way most people I know would say this number, is 2,500. 2,500. Quick note about pronunciation before I continue. When we say the number 20 quickly, the second T disappears. So it sounds like 20. 20. Keep that in mind as we continue. So 2,500, we would say like 2,500. All you need to do is look at the first two numbers and say them like it was one number. 25, 12, 98. Then add the word hundred. Not hundreds with an S, singular. 100. Now, this doesn't apply when the number is exactly on the thousand. For example, if it's 4,000, we simply say 4,000. We don't say 4,000. But this applies to everything else until you get to 10,000. So instead of 6,800, we say 6,800. Instead of 1,200, we say 1,200. It might feel weird in the beginning, but if you know how this works, It will definitely make you sound more natural when you speak English. It's definitely worth practicing. Now let's talk about some common mistakes I hear as a teacher. By far, the most common mistake I hear is how students will take numbers that end with teen, such as 13, 14, 15, etc., and confuse them with numbers that end with T, such as 20, 30, 40, etc. To be fair, native speakers often have to ask clarifying questions to make sure they heard correctly. Context isn't always helpful when talking about numbers. A trip, for example, could just as easily take 50 minutes as 15 minutes. It is a subtle but crucial difference. So there are two things to pay attention to. The different endings. One is teen and the other is T with no N. And the emphasis change. Let me explain what I mean about the emphasis change. If you look up the number 14, 14, in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, there are two possible ways to say this number: 14 and 14. Do you hear the difference? Listen again. 14. 14. Same word, same pronunciation, different emphasis. In the first instance, the emphasis is on the 4, 14. In the second instance, the emphasis is on the teen, 14. Both ways are completely acceptable. If you look up the number 40 in the same dictionary, there is only one way to say it: 40, with the emphasis on the first part of the word, not the second. To avoid confusion between the teen numbers and the multiples of 10, remember that the multiples of 10, such as 20, 30, 40, etc., put the emphasis at the beginning of the word: 20, 30, 40. And don't be afraid to emphasize the final N sound in the teen numbers. Like I said, native speakers need to ask about this all the time too. So if you need to ask, ask. One last thing before I finish. I am of two minds when it comes to using flashcards to learn a language. On the one hand, I think they make language learning very boring. Some apps try to make it fun. For example, I think Duolingo is just a fancy flashcard app disguised as a game. On the other hand, I think flashcards can be a very useful tool to quickly learn vocabulary. If you only use comprehensible input to learn vocabulary, it can take a long time to be exposed to a lot of different numbers, for example. But I think that using flashcards to learn a specific category of vocabulary, not all the vocabulary you hear, but categories like numbers, I think it can be useful. So, I recommend that you take some time to familiarize yourself with numbers beyond 20. Practice higher numbers. Become familiar with them. Because numbers might be boring to learn and you may not hear them all the time when you're watching a show or a movie or reading a book or an article, but when you need them, it's usually pretty important. As always, thank you for listening. If you'd like the transcript for this episode, you can find a link in the description. Until next time, bye.